Welcome to The Unlikely Executive, the podcast where passion meets purpose. Here we share stories of people who have transformed their lives and the world around them by following what truly drives them. I'm Barbra Carlisle, an executive coach and mentor for non-profits, and I help people who want to make a positive impact actually do it. Let's dive in. Welcome, Michele, to the podcast. I'm really pleased to have you as a guest. And the first thing I'm going to ask you is, who are you professionally?
Well, it's lovely to be on. Thank you for inviting me. Professionally, I guess it's fair to say I'm a doctor. I qualified as a doctor in 1995, and then I completed all of my junior doctor training, became a consultant paediatrician around, I want to say 2006. It's quite a long time ago. And my training was always in paediatrics, paediatric oncology and paediatric hematology. And so I was the lead for a department for 10 years around oncology and hemoglobinopathy, which is sickle cell disease. And I did that for a long time and I really loved it. And then I guess there were reasons to change or to think about changing, which I'm sure we'll explore. And I took a gap year, basically, for want of a better expression. And I studied medical law, which I really loved. I ended up working for a really big defence organisation that looks after doctors in difficulty. Stayed there for 5 years, which I really loved. Still did a bit of clinical work. And then somewhere along the line, I sort of ended up in charity. And some of that was sort of by design and some of that was by accident. And so now I'm the chief executive of the Brain Tumour charity. And I have been here for about 18 months.
Isn't it interesting when I ask you who you are professionally today, what's really important is the journey that you've been on, because that forms who you are today. So now you say part intentional, part accident. You're now the CEO of the Brain Tumour charity. Can you just share with us a little bit about what the purpose of the Brain Tumour charity is?
Oh, I love this charity. I really do. And so the Brain Tumour charity was set up. It was actually a combination of a few smaller charities. So it's been around for a little while, but in this iteration, it has been set up to support and assist people who have brain tumour diagnosis. And in particular, the mission is around finding a cure for brain tumours. So we fund a lot of research into looking for treatments and effective cures for brain tumours. But it's also a charity that is there to support people in the here and now. So we have a really big support service for people who are currently living with or have lived with or have looked after somebody with a brain tumour. And then we do quite a lot of advocacy work, which is really about lobbying and campaigning for change around that unmet need for people with brain tumours. And it's largely because, summarising it all, I guess, is that brain tumours remain the biggest cancer killer of people under the age of 40 in the UK and actually in most developed countries as well. It's a really shocking statistic. It hasn't really changed for 20 or 30 years. And actually treatments have been so few and far between that pretty much in adult brain tumours in particular, there's nothing been substantive or new for at least the last 20 years.
Wow. That's quite incredible that it's the largest form of cancer that kills people under 40.
Yes.
And excuse my ignorance in all this. Tell me how people learn that they've got brain tumour.
Okay. So first of all, I think it's important to know that there's more than one kind of brain tumour. I think at last count, there's about 130 different kinds of brain tumour.
Wow.
And for some people, when they think about cancer, they think about malignant and benign if it's not a cancer. But brain tumours, it doesn't sort of easily fall into those categories because anything growing in your head, if it's growing at all, is not a good thing. And this, of course, is actually your brain, I guess. So a brain tumour, even a benign one that is not really doing that much harm, isn't going to spread, isn't going to necessarily kill you, does not mean that it's benign. Because usually where they're situated, they might cause seizures or might cause difficulty with memory or some neurological problems or changes in personality. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you can get brain tumours that are very, very malignant, very aggressive in type. And then, yes, I think for you, sort of in answer to your question about that sounds always like it's going to be very bad news. So for the very malignant brain tumours, the survival rates are very poor. In adults, the most common aggressive brain tumour is something called a glioblastoma. And the 5-year survival for people with a glioblastoma is still appallingly low. It sits at around between 5 and 13%.
Ooh.
So So there are brain tumours that people can live with, but either way, you nearly always need at some point some form of treatment. And that might be surgery, might be chemotherapy, might be radiotherapy. And more recently, there are these more sort of targeted, tailored drugs. But the long and short of it is it's harmful to have a tumour, and it's also harmful to actually be treated for it. And it's, in answer to your first question, it's not preventable. There are some very, very unlucky family groups that are more at risk, and some conditions that predispose you to the risk. But by and large, brain tumours are not preventable. They're very difficult to detect. And we're quite reliant, and people with brain tumours will say this to you, quite reliant on first knowing that there's a problem that you need to speak to somebody about. And then for that person, usually your GP or somebody in A&E, to actually recognise that there's a red flag here, there's something to recognise and to look into. And, presentation can be really varied. Some people present with a headache that won't go away, with very bad fatigue, a combination of headache, fatigue, and, say, cognitive difficulty, memory loss. But it's very variable. It can be slow in presentation, particularly if you've got something slow growing. And in others at the other end of the spectrum, it can be a catastrophic presentation with a seizure or something even more life-threatening, for which you might need urgent surgery. So it's a really biologically complex, difficult area. And it is one of the reasons why quite a lot of policies around cancer care over the years have basically, quite systematically in some ways, missed out people with brain tumours, because they're not, you can't have a screening program, and you can't do a blood test for it yet, and so on and so forth. So it's pretty hard going for people with brain tumours,
And hence the importance of part of the function of your organisation, which is the research.
Yes, I mean, that's everything really, because what's really terrible for people is to be told that they have something, that what they have is treatable in a way that if they'd had it 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it would have been the same way. And it's sort of like being left behind and left out of all of these advances that keep being made. And there really needs to be optimism in the space. And I think there is a bit of optimism now in the space. I do. But I think it's really important for people to know that when they speak to their clinician, that there is some treatment option in front of them. And it isn't just a treatment option along the lines of, we're going to treat you, but unfortunately, we know that it is unlikely to be successful.
Yeah. Because people need hope, don't they?
Yeah.
And even if it's unlikely to be successful, some people will just really need to know that there potentially might be a light at the end of the tunnel. I'm curious as to know why the brain tumour charity for you, because you talked about your career very briefly, and I know we could have an in-depth conversation about your career and stuff, but you did mention paediatrics, which in my understanding is children. I'm not a medic, so I might even be wrong on that one, but from paediatrics to the brain tumour, why?
So there is a connection. So I trained in paediatrics, and in particular, I trained in paediatric oncology, and brain tumours form 1/3 to 1/2 of children with a cancer diagnosis. So actually, they are one of the commonest causes they're one of the commonest cancers in children.
Right.
And they are, because of their very nature, where they are and how they're treated, they are still the leading cause of cancer death in children. And certainly when I was training and then when I was working, one of the things that always really stayed with me was that as the years went by, you could have with parents these difficult conversations about a cancer diagnosis for their children, for their child. But the conversation had more optimism in it as each year went by, with things like a leukemia diagnosis, because every year or every few years there was an advance, there was a small change, a small tweak, a small improvement for those children, which meant that you could take people through that journey and say at the end of it something like, I think, we do have a treatment. We think that treatment is likely to lead to this kind of likelihood of cure. And you could walk people through that together and support them together. That conversation with children with brain tumours, particularly the very aggressive brain tumours, that never changed. 10 years I was a consultant and I had exactly the same conversation. And I'm sort of, I think you are too, I'm very values driven. So things like justice, unmet need, disadvantage, it kind of sits with you. It's almost a sort of moral insult to have that same conversation. Why can't I say something different to families?
Yeah.
But, when I moved into charity, I didn't specifically think, I'm going to go into the brain tumour charity, but I did know, having had I did have one job in charity before this one, but I did know that if I went back into charity, it would be for a charity that was much more closely tied to my medical knowledge, because I had experienced it as somebody who'd actually delivered that treatment and understood that group of people to a degree. So I really wanted it to be about continuing that thread of looking after people and supporting people, but maybe doing it in a different way at scale, about kind of really saying, actually, stop missing out this group of people who really need us. We've got to be better for them.
Yeah. So being an advocate based on not lived experience of having brain tumour, but having been a professional supporting people who are on that journey. And you've been in the head of the organisation now for 18 months. And what is it that you bring to that organisation that is really valuable?
I'm laughing because, for ages, I'm like, what do I bring? What do I add? It's such a great organisation. The people are really fantastic. They're really committed, really dedicated. And I never really know how to answer this question because it's embarrassing. I don't know
what makes it embarrassing?
I never think, they're all really great without me. They're fine. I guess I bring my passion. So from a personal and professional point of view, I bring that passion, that background that we talked about from the clinical perspective. I think I have a real vision around what I think how the charity will be, not just what it is, and what it does. I want us to be, we're already the biggest global dedicated funder of brain tumour research. I want us to be that credible voice. This is on behalf of a community of people. It's not, for our own edification. It's really about saying, how do we really make sure that the research that we are financing it's going to be impactful. It's going to make a difference. It's going to move the dial. It's going to get us that bit closer to finding treatments, better treatments, kind of treatments, cures, giving people hope. And to do that, I think we have to be credible, reliable funders. We have to have the right voice. We have to listen to our community. And I think that's a vision that the charity has, but I share it, setting that vision and constantly asking ourselves, well, when we do that, is that going to have real impact on behalf of our community? Is that going to move the dial? Could that move the dial? And if we don't think that our activities are going to serve that, we don't do them. Yeah. So being really focused around that and inspiring people around that. But actually it's about unmet need and it's about really caring for it.
Yeah. I used to work in research, social research, and I loved it. But one of the challenges is it's not an instant solution, is it? And I can imagine the research that the brain tumour charity are involved in is much more complex and trials. And I don't know whether you do longitudinal studies, but is there a frustration that you can't find the solution for fast enough?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a frustration so much as a sort of occasionally a sense of genuine panic. Because I meet people, every day in my work who are directly affected, lived experience. And I do think when they're talking to me, oh my goodness, we're not going fast enough. But the truth of the matter is with research, particularly medical research into kind of things that, start in the laboratory, but end up in the drug development space and then eventually into kind of treatments that people actually get prescribed and the NHS. That pathway is really long and really complex. And not only can you not rush it, but actually, if you try and shortcut it and don't do it to the quality that it's needed, you will come out at the other end with things that don't work.
Yes.
So being really focused on excellence at the same time as impact and innovation, really focused on the real merits of the foundational work, informing what happens next. That's so important. And I think we are now we do have in the neuro-oncology space, a really big body of biological work that's very, very interesting. And we will get there. So then there's this other piece, which is how do you reverse that sense of despair, that nihilism that you mentioned? How do you give people the optimism? How do you show them that there is something coming? This is worthwhile, but it takes time. But I think the other hand, for me, I think something that's really important, and I think the charity does this very well, is that we can see it as a long journey, and we're not frightened by that. We're not fazed by it. The difficulty is okay, because there's something in that about matching the difficulty we know that the community themselves are going through. Fine, if you're going through that, then we will go through that with you. It's quite an unwavering relentlessness feel, along with the optimism. It's really hard to kind of put into words. But yeah, you have to sort of accommodate, and you have to be truthful with people. People who donate to us, we have to say, actually, there isn't something right round the corner, but things are moving forward. They are definitely moving in the right direction, but they only do so by way of really investing long and hard years early.
Yeah.
We do fund things like clinical trials, but we fund right across the space, discovery research, what's the biology, where can the research help and find targets and treatments, and then do those treatments work? Yeah. So across the spectrum. And in terms of your own journey, what's your biggest challenge from a personal perspective? Oh gosh, there's quite a few.
We've not got time for all of them, Michele. Just give us one or two.
Look, I wasn't trained to be a CEO. I think that's like a really important thing to say to people who are thinking of like changing their careers and moving things around. I wasn't trained to do this. And when you're trained to do something and then you become senior in something where you've got the technical expertise, it's really relatively easier or straightforward to marry up your technical expertise with your leadership skills and to be very legitimate and to know that you're legitimate in that space. But when your skill set is softer, more distributed, some of it may be technical, but actually in truth, I am not trained to be a CEO. And then you step into a role like this where actually you're surrounded by people who in their own fields are better than you. There's no question. I'm not a fundraiser. I'm not, a campaigner. I don't set up the research programs. When you work with people like that, you have to recognize that, first of all, there's a lot to learn. Secondly, I think, and I find this hard, this is a challenge for me, I am actually just terrified most of the time, that I'm going to break the charity in some terrible way because, it's important. And I guess the other challenge is to be able to recognize that leadership is something different to management.
Yeah. And so what is leadership to you?
Oh. I really set myself up for that one, didn't I?
You can tell me what management is, but let's start with what's leadership.
I'm still learning what leadership is for me. Look, I think, as a CEO, on paper, it's easy, right? It just says, you set the vision, you get everybody behind you, you take people with you, you align, and then you're kind of representative of that. You actually embody that alignment. You inspire people and, you set the course and you go, follow me. And then perhaps less so people talk about is actually to do that. You actually need to build the team around you. You need to select the right people. You need to know that you've selected the right people. And you need to give them the capacity to then be the best team that they can be. And that does, I think for most people doesn't come naturally. I think you have to really learn how to do that. And for me, I would say I get that wrong every day. I get that right some days as well, but I get that wrong a lot as well. So you have to have quite a lot of self-awareness, be able to kind of inspire, maybe coach a little bit, if you know how to coach, which I don't really. You always have to manage yourself and how do you manage your own energy, because you have to be really aware of how that impacts other people and how well they can work as a consequence of that. So, for me, I think I try and be very consistent with what I say. I think my senior leadership team does know exactly what I would say, I mean, to the point where I think they do roll their eyes, where I'll go, well, this is a golden thread all the way through this. This is about us being the credible voice, and so on and so forth. So I think you do have to be quite consistent. You do have to keep reminding people, this is where we're going. So does it align? Doesn't it align? Have we made that decision with the needs of the community at the very heart of it, or where we want to go at the very heart of it? And I think you have to sort of act and behave with consistency and integrity. People won't follow your leadership if you don't have that integrity. They can't trust you to do so. They won't give you their best. And a lot of it is you have to take some pretty hard knocks, actually. It's quite lonely. You have to take some feedback. Everyone's got an opinion about their boss, and very few of them are good.
I'm not sure about that, Michelle. Maybe that's your experience.
Oh dear. Well, that's quite revealing, isn't it? But the people do have an opinion, and they're, and I'm never quite sure actually that, sometimes I think it's really, when people share their opinions with you, and sometimes it's not that easy to take the feedback, but you have to hear it. But that's better than people not sharing with you and then kind of just leaving. So, you're constantly thinking about, am I bringing the best out of people? Am I doing the right thing for the organisation? How do I take that feedback and learn from it? And and be honest about your style. I'm very questioning, I've got a lot of curiosity. I want to understand why people do things, and why have you done that? And what does that look like? But I think that can, that can spill over when you're stressed into kind of something more micromanagey. So you have to have good self-awareness. And I would say I'm still learning those things. And I think probably a good leader is always learning those things.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Michelle. And so how do you protect yourself? You're somebody who wants to display the vision and encourage people to follow you and not fall into micromanaging if you're under a stress situation, but your tendencies around being curious and if the stress that might not always land particularly well. So how do you look after yourself?
I think, it's quite difficult to get the balance right. You have to have something outside of work. I mean, my difficulty is, I absolutely love the job. So I'm always sort of drawn back to it going, oh, I've had this idea. Oh, I've had that idea.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, you have to sort of really take a step back and say, well, what, just as you would say to your organisation, what do we want to look like in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? And if so, what do we do to get there? You sort of have to almost have the same way of thinking about, well, what do I want my life to look like, and my relationship to look like, and, my friendships to look like, and make sure that you don't just end up saying, it's so easy to say. I mean, it happens with doctors just as much as it does with CEOs, work always is more important than everything else, but you do have to have that balance. And for me, it's basically my husband and my dog.
Yeah. Do you pull on other people for your support?
I don't think you could do this job and not have that. So I think you have both formal and informal processes. So I have a coach, and then I've also got an informal coach, and you build a set of allies who are in the same space as you. So I've got, a couple of other CEOs in similarly sized charities, and it's one of the few people that you can really say to them, oh my God, are you getting this as well? But also you can end up sharing some really good ways forward, because there's no difficulty that I've experienced where others around me haven't gone, oh, I've had that. This is how we dealt with it. And people are so ready to share and support. And I've got and I would say this is actually a really key element. I have a really good relationship with the chairman of the board.
Right.
And that relationship has to be functional to be able to do the job.
But you've had to work at that, presumably. It wasn't like day one and there was just a massive chemistry between you and the chair of the board. You have to begin to understand each other and understand each other's roles and share the vision, perhaps. I don't know. What makes that a great relationship?
Well, when I was recruited for the job, I actually said that I wouldn't apply until I'd actually met members of the board, because I wanted to understand the culture. Because I think it's really important at this sort of level. It isn't like, it isn't like any other job I've ever applied for before where you go, oh, choose me, I'm definitely the best for the job. You are definitely saying, what does this organisation need? Well, it needs to have a really well-functioning senior leadership team, CEO and board of trustees. And, well, how do I know that I would be right for it? Well, it's got to be a fit. So actually, I really wanted to meet people before I applied for the job, because there's no point in applying for the job where you're not going to be a fit. And it would be really a bad outcome for the organisation, for the people who work with it, if you went in there and within 6 months, it just doesn't work. So,
If I was going to ask you, if you had an opportunity to encourage people to do something or challenge them in some way on the back of this conversation, what would that be?
I think, don't be afraid of change. It's okay. It's awful in many respects, but it's also okay. It's okay. You don't have to start somewhere and then say, well, this is my lot and I have to now live with this forever, even if I'm unhappy in it, or I don't feel fully fulfilled, or I don't feel I've got the right purpose. It's okay to change, but to do that, you have to, so certainly at the charity, we talk about accepting that's going to be a bit scratchy.
Yes.
It's going to be a bit uncomfortable, right? And you may have to really lean into something that you're not comfortable with and you've never done before in order to get to where you think you want to be. So, to give you a bit of like something tangible around it, I knew when I was working as a consultant that, I felt there was something more, something that I could do differently, something that maybe I wasn't utilising, and also there were other things, that made me feel a bit stressed in the environment. And I wanted to do something at scale. I still wanted to help people, but I didn't really know what form that took. And so when I did that law degree, that took that gap year, I didn't really have in mind where that was going. What I had in mind was that I wanted to trigger a change.
Right.
And the only way to trigger a change was to, instead of sort of moaning the whole time, and I definitely did, was to actively say, well, what if I want it to be different? Well, how can I be different in order to be different? And so I just did that. And that actually opened so many doors for me. But also it showed me that actually I could make that change. But when I moved into medical law, I'm not going to lie, I absolutely adored that job, but I did feel a sense of huge grief and loss at leaving clinical medicine and leaving my patients.
Yes.
And you sort of have to know that that's coming. And that's really tough. But it's for something bigger at the other side of it. Yeah.
So don't fear change is the message we're leaving with people, and, accept the challenge that your gut is telling you. If people want to get in touch with you after this, where should they go to? What should they do?
I'm on LinkedIn. I do look at my LinkedIn quite a lot. So if they put in my name to LinkedIn, I only spell it with one L, but I'm sure you're going to put that.
So that's Michele Afif?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, the details will be in the bio as well.
Okay.
It's LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Does the charity have a website?
Yes, the charity has a website. Do put in the Brain Tumour Charity and it will come up.
Michele, thank you for your time. I'm sure we could talk for a bit longer, and I'm sure we will off camera. So many, many thanks.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely.
Thanks for tuning in to The Unlikely Executive. If today's conversation sparked a new idea, inspired a shift, or gave you the nudge to step into your purpose, embrace it and take action. Remember to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss opportunities that can transform the way you lead, work and live your life. I'm Barbra Carlisle, executive coach, mentor and trainer. You can find my details in the show notes, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show and about your own journey. Until next time, take that step to be more authentically you, live your purpose and enjoy making a positive impact.